Okay, so in the last chapter, we replaced some of these elements that you can see in this area here. And in this chapter, as I mentioned, we're going to do something a little bit more advanced. We're going to use some modifiers to improve some of these objects here. And specifically, what we're going to look at is this U-shaped element here. This is a bar, which is actually meant to be made out of one piece here, maybe bent into shape or possibly welded. And also we're going to be looking at these L-shaped pieces of metal here as well, which again are probably be, bent into shape in the real world. So let's have a look at this object first, because we're going to use basically the same system that we use here to do this. It's just a little bit more complicated. So let's make a start on this object here. We'll actually use this cube. No, well, actually, no. Let's make a copy of it. So let's just hold down Shift and just click on it to make a copy. And what we need now is we need some more length, because we need to bend the end of this until it comes around to here. So I'm just going to do this by eye. So let me just find the right axis. Yep, that's the right one. And I think, we need something roughly like that, let's say. And I'm just going to change the view up here, because this, if you look at this cube, it's not actually in the same axis as the world anymore. We're using world coordinates to work with this, so that might actually make it a little bit more difficult to move it around. So let's go into local space for movement and also for rotation. And we're not going to bother with scaling, so we can really forget about that. So let me just move it into position, roughly. And I think you can see that when that's bent, that'll be too much. So let's just make it a little bit shorter. And I think this is actually maybe a little bit too short at the moment here. So I think this, what I've just done, nope, let's just make it a little bit longer again. I think that would actually be fine now. Yeah. And then what we need is we need some segmentation so we can actually bend it along its length, because if I put a bend modifier on here at the moment, we've got no segments, so it's got no geometry to facilitate the bend. So we're just going to click on the width segment here to add some segmentation along its length here. There we go. Actually, I'm clicking on the wrong cube there, so let me just undo that. Get back to normal. Actually, this cube that we need to add the segmentation to. So let's just crank that up a bit. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And now we're just going to go to the modifier panel down here, click on bend, and let's try putting the bend on. And the key thing with the bend modifier is the axis that you're actually bending along. And very often you'll find that it isn't actually correct when you first use it. So let's try bending. Yeah, that isn't actually the axis that we want to bend on. Let's try some of these other options. Let's try bending along Y. You see it's actually bending along there, still not right. So there we are. So X is actually what we want. And we want to actually put in a 90-degree bend, don't we? So let's just put in the value here, 90. There we are. There's the bend that we want. It's actually produce a 90-degree bend. But what it's actually doing is bending along the entire length of the object. And we don't want that to happen. We want to limit the bend to a very small area here. So let's just turn on limit effect. And now let's just try putting up the limit. Yep. So there you go. You can see we can actually keep that as tight or as broad as we want it to be. So we could have a very large bend there if we wanted it to be. But in fact, we want it to be quite small actually. So let me just put it here. And you can see the direction is wrong. So we wanted to bend in this direction, the opposite. So therefore we need to twiddle with this value here. You can see that we can start rotating that around, as you can see. And I'm just going to put it round to 180 degrees. Just type that in. Make it nice and accurate. You can see the last problem now is the placement of it. Not quite in the right place. And to fix that, we need to go into sub-object mode and grab the center, which you can see the center is here. We can just move the center. Just move that into position. You can see now it's actually given us pretty much what we want, what we need. I don't need the underlying object anymore, our guide object, so let me just click on that and delete it. There we go. And we also don't need this cube here as well. Let me just get that also and get rid of that. So now we've got the piece of geometry in place. You can see that one of the issues in this case is that we haven't got enough segmentation on the bend area. So there would be quite an easy fix to that with mesh editing. What I would actually do is I would just segment this as much as I needed. Let's say go down here, because it's procedural, we can go down below the modifier. We can actually change the number of width segments interactively. So I would put that up to the level that I was, that I wanted. And then what I would do is, using mesh editing, is I would delete all of these faces here, and I would just leave an open end here to this geometry. And I would do the same thing here. And because we've got the alignment of the object, what we could do then is we could select this open face and just extrude it down here. And that would get rid of all of these segments and make the object nice and light. It would make it much more, efficient. And that's something that we could look at in DVD3 in the series. But for now, we're just playing with, primitives and just with modifiers. So, that's given us basically what we need in this case. So now we've created this one piece of geometry. We've got a guide object here where we can actually snap this into place. So let's just create a copy of it. Shift drag. And in this case, I want it to be an instance. So, any modifications I make to one will happen to the other. So I'll just say OK to that. Just use the snap tool. Oop. Clicked on the wrong object there. There we are. That's okay. You can see it snapped it to it, but it hasn't actually got the alignment right. So I'm just going to click on E, rotate this around. And then move it into position. There we are. Select that object, delete. Select that and delete. And now you can see one of the issues we've got is that this little bar that comes through here, it's actually, going up against here, which is not really a very good fit, really. So, and also, you can see it's not really very well aligned there. So let's just reposition these objects. Let's just move these down a little bit. They're a little bit better centered there. Then we'll get these objects here. Holding down Control, so I've got them all selected. Let's just center these a little bit better now that we've made that adjustment. Actually, you can see this is moving in the opposite direction up here. So, actually the easiest thing to do is if we just create a little hierarchy, then we can just adjust them all at the same time, really. So I'm just going to select this here, and we're going to say these two objects are children of the bolt. Then we can just select the bolt and move it, and they'll move because they're children of it. There we are, just move that into position. We just created a very simple hierarchy there to aid us in our modeling. And you can see now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this up slightly. And I'm going to just move this down slightly. Just to make a little bit more space. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make this bar here in the middle a little bit thicker. Let's just see if we can find the right parameter for that. It's the height. There you go. Just going to make that a little bit thicker. I'm just going to move this up here. So now we've got room for this to come through here. As you can see, there we are. And now I'm just going to move this down here. Similar kind of distance. Just, judging it by dead reckoning. And then let's make this bar a little bit thicker still now. So just move this up here. The base, and then we can just make an adjustment until it fills the space there. And what we need to do now is just change the height of this slightly until it goes through. So you can see it come out the other side. This is going to be welded into place, if you can imagine, eventually. Also, let's just move this down here and change the length slightly, I think. Just so we have a bit more room around here, so it's a bit more robust. There we are. So I think that's actually improved that quite a lot. But for now, let's move on and look at this object here. So we're going to carry out basically the same kind of procedure, but in this case, we're going to go for a U-bend. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this bar here, and we're going to use it to basically create a U shape that you can see here. And for that, we'll keep the original in place as before. So I'll just hold down Shift to make a copy. And we need it to be twice as long. So let's try and find the right axis. Yeah, its width. You can see at the moment it's 4.3. So we need to make that into 8.6. And then on top of that, we need this thickness here. So we can actually bend and, it'll actually have this gap in the middle. So let's see, if this is 4.3, then split that down the middle there. There's 2. So there's one. So I would say that's about 0.5. So let's be generous. Let's go for, say, 0.7. So we can add that on to here, and that puts us up to 9.3. So now hopefully we should have the length that we need to perform the bend. So I can just move this into position. And as before, we need to increase the height segment. So let's just really crank it up here. So what I'm going to show you now is how to bend this in a very simple way, so we get a very curved U-bend. And then I'm going to show you a slightly more complex way of doing it, where we get a 90-degree bend, then a straight line, and then another 90-degree bend. And that will involve using a sub-object selection. So let's do it the simple way first. Let's just go in, add a bend modifier. We know that we want to bend through 180 degrees because we want to bend it all the way around. So let's just put in 180 degrees here, bend. I'll take a stab on it using the same axis as the other bar, so I'll just change it to X. Yep, you can see that's right. You can see the problem at the moment is that obviously it's bending along the entire length of the bar, which gives us this kind of, basically a kind of semicircle. So what we need to do now is limit the effect again. So I'll just turn on limit effect, and we'll just increase the size of the upper limit, and let's try increasing the size of the lower limit as well. You can see now as they go around, it's bending around here, and it's giving us this nice U shape. But you can see there's not a big enough gap here, so let's just try changing the upper limit a little bit more, and then the lower limit to mirror that. Just, it's not quite right. So you can see we've gone through a 90-degree rotation by doing this. So let's just take this around here, 90 degrees, press W, move it up into position. And you can see actually that's not bad. It's pretty good. Just look in there. Maybe it's a little bit too thin still. So if we wanted to, we could just make it a little bit bigger. Just move it up slightly. Actually, that's pretty much bang on, I think, really, isn't it? It's not bad. And we can just move it down into position there. So it matches the original object pretty well. We've got this curve coming around here. Now, maybe that's what you want. But in this case, what I'd rather have is more of a sort of, sharp 90-degree bend rather than this fully circular one here. So let's just undo a few things and let's try it a different way. So the basis of what we want is the same, really. We want to bend, but we want to kind of have two bends, a two-stage bend. So the first one needs to be 90 degrees. So let's just put 90 degrees in there. And you can see we've pretty much got, the first stage. Just move this into position. Yeah, it's exactly where we want it to be. So we've got a 90-degree bend here. Now, what we need to do next is to put in another bend along here. I'm just going to make this bend a little bit tighter. So this inner axis here, this inner surface is a little bit tighter. You can see the subdivisions aren't really enough to pull off that. So let's just crank it up a bit. And as I said, I would actually make this a lot more efficient in the end by actually removing all these subdivisions and using mesh modeling to actually, extrude it out and make it into a simpler object again. But for now, let's just look at making the second bend. So the obvious thing to do would be to go up and add another bend modifier and put in 90 degrees. Obviously, it looks like it's the wrong axis, so let's just try changing it to X. But you can see, you've got a problem here, which is that now the entire mesh has been selected. And no matter what we do, no matter what axis we pick, we're always going to get kind of weird results out of it. We're not going to get the kind of bend that we're looking for, which is just limited to a part of the mesh. Now, to get that, what we need to do is to limit the modifier just to that part of the mesh. So to do that, we can go down here, and we can go and we can say mesh select. Just choose here. And then we need to kind of get let's have a look. No, we need to do press L for side-on view. There we are. And what we're going to do is we're just going to select the vertices from here on up. So let's go in, select the vertices up to here. And then we pass that selection on up to the bend modifier. And now what we need to do is we need to fiddle around with the settings to get the bend to work in, the way that we want. Let's try changing the axis to Y. Doesn't look quite right. Z, That's looking pretty good, I think. Maybe it's going in the wrong direction, so we can just either do minus 90 as the angle, goes in the opposite direction, or we can change the direction so it goes round to the opposite way. So that would be, say, either minus 180 or 180. Doesn't really matter. What we need to do now is limit the bend, just like this one. So let's go down and have a look at the settings for this. We can see it was 0.62. So let's use, similar values to get the same kind of result. Let's try putting in 0.62. You can see, as with the first bend, the bend is taking place from the pivot point of the box. Obviously, the center point of the bend by default goes to the pivot point of the box, the original box. And in this case, we don't want the bend to take place from there. So we need to go in and modify the center point. We can just move this around interactively. And you can see that when I move this here, it's actually changing the point from which the bend takes place. So you can see that in this case, the limitation is actually in the wrong area. We're actually limiting the bend, so it doesn't take place up here, but takes place down here on the mesh. So we need to get rid of that, and we need to actually go in the opposite direction. So we need to put in 0.62 here. And, it's not magic what I'm doing here. I'm only experimenting, and usually when you're using modifiers in this way, you find out these kind of things by trial and error. It's just a case of practicing with the modifier, seeing how it works, modifying where you put the center point and the pivot and so on. And, you'll get the same kind of results that I'm doing here. But I don't know this beforehand. I'm just having to basically experiment to see, what I get out of it. So let's just move this down here until, as you can see, if I move this here, I get a bigger radius to my bend. If I pull it in here, I get a tighter radius. So I know that it should really be in the center of the bar here. Let's just put that right in the center. All we have to adjust now is the height here. Let's just move that into position. There we are. So I think that's just about right. And I can just come out of the center. And if I wanted to, not have this selection passed on any further up the stack, I could just go to mesh select and not select anything. And, now we've basically got what we need. So as you can see, it's looking pretty cool now, but the problem we have at the moment is that we have all of these subdivisions, as you can see along the length of the U shape here. So in the next chapter, we'll move on and we'll actually skip to something that we'll be covering DVD2, which is mesh editing. And I'm not going to go into any real detail. I'm just going to show you how we can use a sort of multi-stage process to actually take this primitive result that we have here and take it to another level, clean it up, and make it more usable. And then in the rest of the chapter, we'll actually go on and replace the rest of the elements that we've seen in the setup here. So let's do that now.